Hey guys, tonight we're sinking softly into the dappled groves of ancient Greece, where the breeze smells like crushed thyme and overripe pomegranates, and the trees whisper secrets louder than you'd think. Nymphs flit between the mossy stones, not just radiant and barefoot, but also shockingly petty. Yes, tonight we're unraveling one of mythology's strangest bands. Why Hera, Queen of Olympus, once forbade nymphs from complimenting each other too competitively. You may think that sounds adorable, but don't be fooled. This is weaponized kindness wrapped in olive oil and flower crowns. And trust me, you probably won't survive this without smiling at least once in your sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot through a moonlit garden where the air tastes like mint and secrets. This grove isn't on any modern map, not because it's lost, but because the gods ask cartographers nicely not to ask questions. Overhead, silver leaves flutter without breeze, and something giggles behind a laurel hedge. Probably a nymph, possibly two, and definitely gossiping. These weren't just any nymphs. They were Hera's hand-picked chorus of beauty and balanced forest spirits who maintained the aesthetic equilibrium of her favorite sacred grove. Known in ancient scripts as Zilynthia, though historians still argue whether that name ever existed or was just made up by a particularly bored monk with great handwriting. Zilynthia was a place where flowers arranged themselves alphabetically, bees hummed in pentatonic scale, and sunlight refracted through leaves like stained glass. But beneath this curated serenity, a new ritual had begun to bloom, and it started with one tiny, whispered sentence. "You're literally glowing." Alaris, like, have you been bathing in crushed moonstone again? It was meant to be kind. Maybe, but soon it was answered with, "Oh, please, Thalea, if I'm glowing, you're blazing." That hair, literal bronze fire. It's unfair, honestly. And that was the moment the first compliment duel was born. At first, it was innocent enough, like a verbal hug passed between dewdrops. The nymphs, who'd once only hummed or danced, began forming sentences, and then metaphors, then similes, and then entire spoken soliloquies praising each other's beauty, grace, and seasonal fragrance choices. You know how in modern group chats there's that one friend who hypes you up until you're crying into your fries? Imagine 40 of those friends, in Grecian couture, with nothing but time and godly diction. Soon, the grove was a war zone of sincerity. Nymphs lined up in semicircular formations, exchanging volleys of ever more dramatic compliments like, "Your freckles are constellations Zeus could only dream of naming." And if elegance were a crime, you'd be serving a life sentence in silk. Every flattery needed to be topped, every metaphor more florid. And as they practiced, the compliments grew more absurd. One nymph allegedly compared her friend's walking posture to a perfectly balanced amphora on a ship's prow at dawn, which, as an image, is both flattering and dangerously specific. Now, here's your first sleepy side fact. Ancient Greek society actually did value rhetorical play and conversation, especially in symposium settings. Orators were judged not just by logic, but by flair. Think of this as the forest version of that. But instead of wine, they were drunk on vocabulary. And of course, there had to be winners. At the end of each verbal sparring match, the other nymphs would declare a victor, usually by tossing flower petals or snapping branches in applause. It was all very poetic, very exclusive, and incredibly loud. Birds began nesting elsewhere. Even bees started filing noise complaints, which, okay, were mostly just angrily looped dance patterns. But still, Hera, meanwhile, tried to ignore it. At first, she had bigger things to worry about, like keeping Zeus from accidentally turning himself into livestock again. But when the compliments reached audible levels from Olympus, she furrowed her immaculately sculpted brow and descended one morning to investigate. You're standing right where she first landed, in the glade's sun-splashed center, beside a fountain shaped like a peacock drinking its own reflection. Typical Hera symbolism, proud and extra. Her sandals didn't even disturb the moss, but her silence That was louder than any compliment duel could hope to be. The nymphs paused, wide-eyed, cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer emotional whiplash of 50 back-to-back affirmations. Some were crying. One had fainted after being called a living sonnet draped in dew. Hera said nothing, just looked around at the chaos. Butterflies circling like backup dancers, rose petals still falling in slow motion, and an entire deer standing awkwardly in the corner, like it had wandered into the wrong rehearsal. She left without a word, but the ground smoked under her footsteps. That's when the nymphs knew. This wasn't just a game anymore. They were on divine radar. And for Hera, who prized balance and subtle beauty, this much emotional enthusiasm was basically a natural disaster. You lean against a curved olive tree that smells faintly of old incense and something like honeysuckle tea left out in the rain. A nymph dances nearby, twirling so fast her hair creates a halo of blur and light. Another sighs dramatically and murmurs. Your movements make Apollo's lyre seem out of tune. You blink slowly. They're still doing it. Since Hera's silent visit, you'd think the nymphs would tone it down, whisper their praises, maybe write a polite poem and leave it under a mossy rock. But no such chill was adopted. In fact, the compliment contests only got louder and more sparkly. They began holding dawn-time soft-glow sessions to practice metaphors under first light. They added categories: best hair in wind, most radiant cheekbone in morning fog, most evocative sigh in response to compliment. It became a full-time lifestyle. One group even embroidered their praise into sashes and wore them like pageant queens. But instead of Miss Thessaly 499 BC, it said things like, sunset manifestation of worthiness. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some fringe folklorists argue that this is where the modern concept of beauty pageants came from. Not Sparta's fitness contests, not Roman festivals, but a secretive grove where nymphs just tried to out-nice each other until the gods had to file complaints. As for the bird calls, those poor, confused birds, their delicate symphonies had once been perfectly tuned to the grove's acoustics. But now, with every other tree echoing lines like, your presence shatters ennui, like Poseidon's trident splits the surf, their songs were getting drowned out. A nightingale tried to imitate the flattery, but tragically developed laryngitis from overexertion. She retired early, moved to Cyprus, and opened a quiet worm cafe. You walk deeper into the glade where the nymphs once practiced the amplification. It was a training technique. One nymph would give a compliment, and another would repeat it louder and more dramatically. By round 4, it would involve choreography and sometimes smoke effects thanks to a fire sprite who just wanted to help. You recall one infamous session that began with, "You look lovely," and ended with, "You are the reason starlight fears fading." That echo is still trapped in a pine tree somewhere. Occasionally, if the wind hits right, it mutters, "Fears fading," like it's trying to remember its line. And this, of course, was when the unintended consequences began. Because with great complimenting comes great responsibility. And unfortunately, not all nymphs took it as a fun little game. Some took it very personally. One particularly radiant nymph, named Lysimele, once received a compliment so specific, "Your laugh has the rhythm of a dolphin leaping past the sunken city of Caliston," that she went into an existential crisis. She hadn't felt that radiant. She'd had a rough morning. Her curls were flat. The dew hadn't formed evenly on her favorite fern skirt. And yet, such praise, she began spiraling, wondering if her beauty was only visible in metaphor, whether she existed outside of poetic language at all. Was she real, or just a simile with legs? Psychologists today might call this praise dissociation. The ancient Greeks just called it nymphal collapse. Meanwhile, factions formed. There were the literalist nymphs who believed compliments should only reference actual things. Your ankles are symmetrical was considered peak admiration. Then there were the dreamers who preferred comparing people to abstract concepts like the idea of loyalty or what it must feel like to be gently remembered by a dream you forgot. The fights got passive-aggressive fast. One nymph complimented another's sentence structure with, "That was almost coherent." Very brave. Another smiled sweetly and said, I adore how you dress like compliments don't matter. Burns disguised as blessings. Of course, Hera wasn't watching every moment. She had temples to maintain, priests to smite, and the occasional cow-related husband incident to sort out, but her sacred grove was now a swirl of echoing praise, compliment fatigue, and the sound of sparrows aggressively sighing. So, she sent another warning. Still no direct punishment, just a little sign. A sacred swan, pure white and glowing faintly, landed in the glade carrying a scroll in its beak. The scroll unrolled itself in midair and read, simply, balance is still beautiful. Consider the volume. Hey, the nymphs clapped. One whispered, even her handwriting glows with divine restraint. Another cried, a critique so elegant it feels like a kiss. They missed the point entirely. Historians still argue whether Hera meant to give them a second chance or whether this was all part of an elaborate divine test to see how far mortals could misinterpret clear instruction. Either way, it didn't work, because by then, the compliment game had mutated. There were now practice leagues, a compliment calendar, a scented parchment newsletter that listed weekly top 10 praisers, ranked by metaphor density and adjective innovation. Some nymphs even hired setters to workshop new lines. One unfortunate goat boy fainted after being told his hoof placement was like punctuation in the body language of angels. You step through a part of the grove that was once the semi-official compliment rehearsal studio, a ring of mushrooms dusted with glitter where praise was polished like sculpture. Even now, it hums faintly with whispered sonnets. One tree stump holds the ghost of a compliment so powerful it allegedly made a dryad turn temporarily translucent. The words were, your presence rehydrates my soul. And look, some of this might sound silly or exaggerated, but in a world where words held real power, compliments weren't just nice, they could enchant. Some flattery literally made plants bloom. One particularly confident nymph caused a whole row of orchids to open 6 months early by praising a friend's freckles. Of course, that caused a minor ecological crisis when a local bee tribe accused them of nectar tampering. But you get the picture. Hera had a problem. A grove once known for subtle grace had become an arena of lyrical one-upmanship. Birds were distressed, trees were starting to rhyme, and the last thing Olympus needed was another nymph uprising powered by metaphor. You rest under a sycamore and close your eyes. In the distance, someone yells, your eyes have the vibe of unwritten epic. A chorus of gasps follows, then applause. Then the distant sound of thunder, not from the sky, but from Hera's temples. She's listening now, and she's not impressed. You're sitting now on a cool stone bench, carved in the shape of a sleeping tortoise. One of those unnecessary yet entirely charming design choices. Nymphs loved before the compliment wars. Around you, the glade feels heavy with perfume, not just floral though. Yes, layers of jasmine, crushed fig, and that strange cedar mint hybrid no one ever identifies but emotional perfume. The kind of atmosphere where sincerity is so thick it makes your teeth ache. Because the compliment game, it has evolved. And not in a good way. They call it the blooming. It started with petals, just a few harmless ones, drifting lazily from the nearby laurel. Each time someone said something exceptionally sweet. At first, the nymphs thought it was charming. Nature is applauding us, they giggled. But then one day, during a high-level compliment match between Arsenia and Calithra, who were, let's be honest, ruthless with similes, the petals started spinning, then bursting into fragrant clouds. That's when the grove realized something had shifted. Compliments weren't just appreciated, they were becoming sorcery. Turns out, the sheer emotional intensity of the praise had started weaving itself into the grove's natural magic. Words, especially poetic ones, had always held power in Greek myth. But no one expected them to accidentally enchant the flora. Now, a compliment like, your voice tastes like early figs, could cause nearby grapevines to ferment instantly. Not ideal during pollen season, one overzealous nymph called her friend a harp tuned to moonlight, and 3 bushes bloomed so violently that a passing oracle fainted from beauty shock. She later awoke insisting she had seen the end of the world and that it was styled perfectly. Darling? Mainstream scholars agree that many Greek rituals involved speech as an activating force chants, invocations, even love charms. But this was something else. an entire subculture turning sweet words into passive-aggressive chaos. And now it was political. Certain compliments became exclusionary. If a nymph wasn't receiving enough praise, she was assumed to be socially fading. Did you hear no one complimented Euthenia at the Twilight Circle? Not even a metaphor. Poor thing. She must have shed her shimmer. You brush a fingertip across a vine and feel it purr faintly. Yes, vines were starting to purr now, thanks to a line someone once whispered about the luxurious murmur of foliage, another unintended side effect. Even worse, nymphs had begun raiding each other. They formed secret societies with names like the Chrysanthemum League and Sisterhood of Radiant Regard. Entrance was rumored to require submitting your 10 strongest compliments, sealed with rose oil and a tear of sincere admiration. If accepted, you got a little silver pin shaped like a compliment swirl. If rejected, well, you were lovely in your own way, which is nymph code for not invited. The passive aggression had bloomed into its own ecosystem. And it wasn't just exclusion. Some began withholding compliments to manipulate others. Oh, you wore your hair in fishtail braids again. Pause. No flattery, just silence. And in this world, silence hit like a slap. Echoes of kindness withheld were louder than any praise ever spoken. You pass a stone circle etched with crescent shapes once used for midsummer dances. Now it serves as the compliment tribunal's unofficial debating floor. Nymphs gather here in hushed clusters to argue about intent. You're as timeless as an undecided prophecy, a true compliment, or an insult wrapped in ambiguity. Historians still argue whether this spiral into flattery politics was inevitable or if Hera's initial silence accidentally encouraged escalation. One theory suggests she hoped they'd exhaust themselves. Another posits she simply underestimated how extra woodland spirits could be. Let's be honest. Everyone underestimates nymphs until it's too late. And then came the fashion phase. Yes, fashion. Because of course, if your words were magical, your outfit needed to reflect the level of compliment you wanted to attract. One nymph, Lysidora, wore a crown of frozen dew and claimed it represented transient perfection. Another appeared in a gown made entirely of woven fog and swan feathers, murmuring, "I am between states," and therefore beyond judgment. They were no longer just complimenting beauty. They were curating it. One fringe historian wrote that this was the true beginning of aesthetic elitism in mythological fashion. That nymphs, in their pursuit of pure admiration, became the first creatures to monetize vibes. That might be an overstatement, but when someone's tunic literally glows when they're praised, things tend to escalate. You spot a small tree nearby still scorched from the great metaphor meltdown, where two nymphs got into a praise-off so intense that nearby flora burst into spontaneous photosynthesis. One line. You embody the sigh of a comet skimming nostalgia was later banned for being emotionally unstable. Of course, none of this was sustainable. Some nymphs began collapsing from over-complimenting. Not physically, emotionally. One was last seen lying in a bed of violets, whispering, "No one has complimented my aura since last Tuesday." Another developed compliment addiction, where she'd wander the grove asking satyrs if her ankle-to-sand ratio was spiritually pleasing. The satyrs said yes, always, but you could tell they didn't mean it. Even animals started getting sucked into the vortex. A squirrel who'd once been indifferent to praise was told, "Your tail is a poem in fur." The squirrel never blinked again. Eventually, one bold nymph named Elaire went silent for an entire week. No compliments, no praise, no reactions. When asked why, she said quietly, "I forgot what my voice sounds like when it isn't trying to impress." And just like that, the spell began to crack. You rest under a canopy of silence, noticing that even the wind has gone shy. A petal floats by with no one to applaud it. Somewhere, a nymph exhales without trying to sound lyrical, and for the first time in weeks, the grove feels quiet, not boring, just calm, like it's remembering what stillness is, what beauty is when no one describes it. But of course, peace never lasts long when gods are involved, especially not when love enters the scene. You feel it before you see her. A shift in temperature suddenly warmer, like honey being poured into sunlit milk. The air becomes heavier, sweeter. Somewhere in the distance, bees start humming a little louder than they should. and even the clouds pause overhead, unsure if they're still allowed to drift normally. Then Aphrodite arrives. She doesn't walk, she glides, barefoot on the moss, of course, but somehow without ever looking down. You're not even sure if her feet touch the ground. She wears a robe that looks like it was spun from flirtation itself, and her hair, let's just say it moves like it has opinions. The nymphs freeze mid-compliment. One had just been about to say, "You illuminate sadness like a chandelier in mourning," but the words die in her throat as Aphrodite tilts her head and gives that knowing smile, the kind that says, "Oh, sweetie, I invented that metaphor 3 centuries ago. This was not a planned visit." Aphrodite rarely announced herself, preferring to drop in like a beautiful thunderstorm of affection and perfectly timed sarcasm. And yet, her arrival now feels suspiciously well-timed, almost as if she'd been watching, listening, perhaps even judging. Because here's the thing about the goddess of love. She adores drama, as long as she's the most admired person in the room. And in this grove, that title was being challenged. Aphrodite surveys the scene. Glitter-stained leaves, faint echoes of poetic chaos. One bush still twitching slightly from a recent metaphor. A group of nymphs clustered nervously around a glowing snail, trying to pretend they hadn't just been rating each other's compliments on little wax tablets. "Oh," she murmurs. Finally, so this is where all the adjectives have gone. The nymphs giggle, unsure whether it's safe to breathe. Mainstream myths often portray Aphrodite as indulgent, vain, even petty, but they forget her intellect. She knows love, not just romantic passion, but the psychology of admiration, longing, validation. She understands the need to be seen and the dangerous spiral of needing to be seen best. So, when she walks into a grove that's been taken over by competitive flattery, she doesn't just see a problem. She sees a game, and like any good Olympian, she decides to win it. "I think," she says, brushing a loose curl from her cheek, "we can make this more fun." The nymphs blink. More, Aphrodite introduces a new rule: spontaneous compliment duels. 2 nymphs enter a ring. One speaks, then the other. No prep. No metaphors longer than 6 words. The audience claps for the winner, and the winner gets one of Aphrodite's enchanted rosebuds. What does the rosebud do? Depends how much you mean the compliment. Aphrodite purrs. It's unclear whether the rosebud gives beauty, luck, or just a nice scent. But none of the nymphs care. They need it. And so, the flatter-offs begin. By sunset, the grove is shaking with laughter, applause, and mild magical backfiring. One compliment accidentally turns a squirrel's fur pink. Another summons a burst of harp music that won't stop playing the same 3 chords. The air practically fizzes with enchanted syllables. It's chaotic. It's loud. It's dangerously fun. But not everyone is laughing. You spot one figure at the edge of the grove, half hidden in vine shadow. She watches, arms crossed, not joining the applause, not smiling. Her name is Echo, and though you don't know it yet, she's about to become the most tragic footnote in this ridiculous story. But for now, she watches as Aphrodite dominates the compliment scene, not through participation but through her mere presence. Every word said in her direction feels like praise, even if it's not meant to be. A nymph stumbles through a compliment meant for her friend, only for Aphrodite to tilt her head and say, "Darling, that was cute. You almost believed it yourself. It should be humiliating, but it's not. It's Aphrodite. She can't lose." Here's your historical note for the night. In many Greek myths, Aphrodite's power lies not in her force but in her inevitability. Love doesn't need to shout. It simply walks into the room and rearranges everyone's priorities. And that's exactly what she does here. She isn't against the nymphs complimenting each other. She just wants them to remember who taught them how. But of course, when gods play, mortals pay. By the 3rd day of flatter-offs, the grove is exhausted. Compliments are starting to slur. One nymph accidentally compares her friend's nose to a melancholic beat, and another bursts into tears after being told her existence is tolerably aesthetic. Aphrodite sits on a mossy throne, sipping from a goblet of something pink and fizzing. This, she sighs, is art. And yet, behind the giggles and glow, a new tension is blooming. Because now, the nymphs aren't just trying to outdo each other, they're trying to impress her. Every compliment is laced with a sideways glance, every metaphor a performance. And Aphrodite, who lives for love, watches. As affection becomes performance, becomes ambition, becomes a mask, she says nothing. But the vines around the grove begin curling in, whispering, listening. Because somewhere high above, Hera has noticed, again, and this time, she's not just annoyed, she's offended. You sit at the edge of a shallow spring that glows faintly blue, like moonlight caught in a bowl. Its surface is perfectly still, until something behind you sighs so poetically that a ripple forms, shaped uncannily like a calligraphy flourish. The echo of too many compliments still floats across the water like fog with opinions. But tonight, someone else stirs in the grove, not Aphrodite, lounging like a champagne ad with divine skin, not Hera, not yet. But her echo. Yes, that echo, the one who will eventually be remembered for her tragic love story. The girl who can only repeat what others say. But tonight, she's still whole, still a full voice, still dangerous in the gentlest way. You watch her from a distance. She's not the loudest nymph, not the flashiest, but her compliments. They're devastating, elegant, precise, lethally sincere. She's not trying to win Aphrodite's rosebuds. She doesn't want to be queen of the grove. She just wants people to feel seen. She walks softly through the glade, murmuring quiet praise in a way that makes even the squirrels tear up. Your stillness is the kind of quiet that makes owls jealous. She tells one anxious nymph, "You remind me of when the sky holds its breath just before dawn." She says to another, "They don't cry because they're flattered. They cry because they believe her." You wouldn't know it to look at her now, but Echo grew up among mountain valleys where sound never came back the same. She learned early how words change depending on who said them, and how fast compliments, to her, were sacred, not tools, not performance. Sacred. That made her dangerous. Historians still argue whether Echo was born with her gift or learned it by listening so long she could reweave speech into something magical. Some even claim she could mimic emotion itself, not just words, but the heartbeat behind them. Fringe theory. Maybe, but after tonight, you might believe it. You follow her through a quieter part of the grove. The Flatteroffs have moved closer to Aphrodite's throne, leaving this patch untouched. And in this stillness, Echo speaks to the trees, not compliments. This time, confessions. "I think it's gone too far," she says, brushing her fingers along a leaf. The leaf quivers. "Just once. I miss when we sang without needing to impress anyone. When we danced because it felt like wind, not because someone was watching." A small vine curls gently around her wrist in what can only be described as a hug. Then, she whispers something soft, so soft even you can barely hear it. "I'm afraid Hera will end this, and we won't get to choose how." She's right. Because in Olympus, Hera is pacing. She's seen the vines respond, seen how the grove reacts to Echo's voice like it's been missing that frequency. But more importantly, she sees the root of the problem. Admiration without moderation, praise without purpose, even love without limits. Aphrodite's domain, not hers, and Hera hates losing control. But Hera isn't impulsive. She plots, and so she drafts a warning. You walk now past the edge of the sacred path, where golden leaves begin to line the ground unnaturally warm, unnaturally orderly. This is where Hera's magic passes through. She sends another message, this time in the form of a gift, a fruit basket. Yes, a fruit basket. Divine. Of course, perfectly arranged figs, pomegranates, and a single apple carved with the word balance. It appears in the middle of the compliment stage during a particularly messy flatter-off where someone just said, "Your eyelashes remind me of justice," and the recipient fainted from the strain of decoding it. The message is ignored. The fruit is eaten. No one thanks her. You hear a whisper through the grove? Maybe Hera's just jealous. The peacocks in the distance stop moving. Even the bees go quiet. You don't say things like that. Not if you like having ankles. And Echo. Echo tries to stop it. She calls a meeting unofficial, unsanctioned, under a willow whose branches form a privacy curtain. A handful of nymphs gather, unsure what to expect. She doesn't lecture. She doesn't scold. She just asks, "Do you remember the first time someone said something kind to you?" She says, they nod. "Did you remember how it felt?" More nods. "And did you ever want to say something kind just to feel that again?" One nymph starts crying. Another covers her face. Echo nods too. "That's what I thought. But it's not working anymore." "Is it?" They shake their heads, and for a moment, there's hope. Just a whisper of maybe we can fix this before Hera does. But unfortunately, that hope doesn't travel fast enough. The next day, someone tries to compliment a butterfly's wing pattern and accidentally opens a minor dimensional rift. Harmless. Really, just a loop where the compliment keeps replaying every 7 seconds in 3 different languages. But it's the last straw. Because when that butterfly flutters past Hera's temple and whispers, delicate chaos, fluttering through fate, she doesn't find it cute. She finds it infuriating. You feel the pressure shift like thunder trapped behind silk. A storm without wind, a tension that presses gently but unmistakably into your eardrums. The grove goes quiet not out of respect, but instinct. Like even the moss knows that Hera's patience has cracked. And when Hera's patience cracks, the gods don't send fire. They send scrolls. The sky doesn't darken. There's no lightning bolt or dramatic entrance. Just a single papyrus scroll, glowing faintly, descending through the air with the slow grace of something very disappointed in you. It lands, of course, on the central mossy stage of the flatter-offs, right where someone had just recited. Your aura reminds me of a memory I wish I had. The applause dies mid-clap. The scroll opens itself. It's scented with bay leaves and the unmistakable fragrance of divine authority. There is no dramatic preamble, no salutation, just this: you are all lovely, and I am tired. Beauty without balance becomes noise. This grove is mine. I request its silence. Hera, you could hear a pollen grain drop. Aphrodite sips her sparkling nectar and arches a single brow. How poetic. Even her threats rhyme. No one moves. Well, almost no one. One of the younger nymphs bursts into tears. Does this mean we're ugly now? Another faints into a bush that immediately wilts in solidarity. Hera hadn't banned compliments outright yet, but everyone feels it. This was the divine equivalent of your mom giving you the "I'm not mad," just disappointed speech with a warning footnote, promising actual wrath next time. So, in a rare moment of collective wisdom, the nymphs decide to cool it. A little, at first. They try something called soft flattery, muted compliments delivered in a whisper, with no metaphors, no alliteration, and absolutely no gestures. Like, your face is nice, period. Or, you have a presence. That's all. Echo, sensing a chance to salvage the grove's soul, proposes a new system: neutral acknowledgments. Instead of compliments, they'll just state things kindly, but with zero embellishment. You are standing, you arrived. You exist in this space. And to be fair, it works briefly. The grove gets quieter. No more enchanted petals bursting midair. The bees return. The birds start relearning their own songs without competing against live spoken sonnets. Even the vines seem to relax, uncurling from their emotional bracing. Historians would later refer to this as the Gray Week, a short-lived experiment in emotional neutrality. Nymphs walked carefully, no sudden praise, just gentle nods. And for a moment, it almost felt like the grove might return to something resembling normal. But you already know what's coming, don't you? The problem with silence is that it echoes, especially when echo is nearby. Because the neutral statements, they don't land, they don't spark, they don't bloom, and more importantly, they don't make anyone feel beautiful. It's like being handed a blank birthday card. Respectful, sure, but a little soul-crushing. The nymphs start twitching, looking over their shoulders, whispering compliments in secret, behind hedges. Illicit praise rings, midnight metaphors scratched into the bark. And Echo watches. She's trying her best to model restraint. She no longer offers shimmering metaphors. She no longer praises freckles or footstep rhythms. She just listens. And one day, she hears too much. It happens in the southeast quadrant of the grove, an area still faintly glowing from past flatter-offs. Two nymphs, thinking they're alone, begin to compliment each other in hushed, desperate tones. You're like springtime. If springtime apologized less, and you smell like what dreams leave behind. Echo, hiding nearby, accidentally whispers the second line. She doesn't mean to. It just slips out. Her voice is too attuned, too reactive, too trained by years of flattery. The other nymphs hear it, and they cheer. Because her voice, her phrasing, it's not just beautiful, it's better than they remember. Like hearing a song you forgot you loved. And that's the moment everything unravels. Suddenly, nymphs are begging Echo to speak again, to give them real praise, not these stale statements of existence. They want magic. They want metaphors. They want meaning. Echo refuses at first, but when one young nymph, eyes glossy, says, "I just want to feel seen again," something inside Echo softens, and she speaks a single sentence: "You carry grace." Like dusk carries the last warmth of the sun, it echoes, not once, but twice, then 5 times. The grove, long dormant, erupts. Flowers bloom, trees shimmer, birds scatter. A breeze rushes in like applause. Echo slaps her hand over her mouth, but it's too late. The grove has heard her, and more importantly, so has Hera. The moment Hera hears Echo's words for real this time, not in metaphor, not in some twisted pedal-powered back channel, but directly the clouds above Olympus pause mid-drift, like they're waiting for instructions. And Hera, she seethes, not because of the compliment itself, it was, admittedly, beautiful, graceful, almost restrained, but because of what it represents. Echo had become the embodiment of the exact thing Hera warned about: beauty without bounds, kindness as performance, admiration as addiction. And now the grove had erupted again, drunk once more on poetic flattery. And Hera's grove, her sanctuary, was glowing like a teenager's dream journal. You walk the grove's edge just as the vines begin to tighten, not visibly, not harshly, but with that quiet, creeping grip of someone gently but firmly, preparing to take the fun away. Meanwhile, Echo, she's spiraling, because that one sentence she let slip, it won't stop. It's still echoing, in strange new patterns. You hear it now softly. Beneath your breath, you carry grace. Like dusk carries the last warmth of the sun, it rides the breeze. It clings to the water. Even the moss seem to murmur it back when you step too hard. Nymphs begin repeating it, not maliciously, just mesmerized. They start layering their own versions on top. You smile like rivers forgive. Your silence holds more kindness than Aphrodite's laughter. Aphrodite hears that one and laughs out loud from her moss throne. Oh, she's good. But Hera is done. That's when the magic vines show up. At first, you think they're just unusually tidy. They move slowly, politely, even winding around tree trunks like careful decorators. But soon, they start weaving barriers, curtain-like walls of green that muffle sound and reshape paths. You try to walk forward and realize your footpath now leads you in a soft circle. Another step, and you're back where you started. The grove is folding in on itself like it's trying to hush its own joy. Echo is the first to notice. Something's listening, she whispers, and it's trying to contain us. That's when the whispering vines speak, not in words, but in sensation. When you brush against one, you don't hear a voice, you feel a thought. Too much, too loud, too far. They are Hera's silent enforcers, her final warning, growing quietly beneath the soil all this time. And now they're awake. Historians still debate whether Hera created the whispering vines herself, or if they were ancient remnants of some earlier era nature's immune system against divine excess. Some say the vines only activate when sacred boundaries are breached. Others argue they were just overwatered and moody. Either way, tonight, they're on high alert. The grove starts to change. Compliments spoken aloud vanish mid-sentence. Echo tries to say, "You are," but the words get swallowed. No sound, no echo, just silence. One nymph claps in frustration, then covers her mouth in horror as her own laughter is absorbed into the air like steam on cold glass. The vines are dampening everything: emotions, praise, even poetry. Aphrodite, for her part, watches with arms crossed and lips pursed. She doesn't like this. This isn't balance, it's censorship. You can't just ban emotion, she mutters. That's what marble statues are for. But Hera does not respond, because this is not a conversation. It's a consequence. You find yourself in the heart of the grove now, where the oldest tree, a white-streaked olive called the mother bark, towers over everything. It once bloomed every spring in response to the grove's emotional temperature. Now it's frozen. No petals. No hum. Echo kneels beside it, whispering apologies into its roots. "I didn't mean to. I was trying to heal something." The vines don't respond, but they don't tighten either, which, in Hera terms, is practically a hug. That night, the grove falls into silence. Not a sad silence. Not yet. Just waiting. Like someone holding their breath before a verdict. And here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. In some lesser-known versions of the myth, Hera doesn't punish Echo directly, not yet. Instead, she watches, she waits, she lets Echo's own voice grow so powerful that it becomes impossible to control. That, they say, is the real curse. Not to be silenced, but to be repeated until your words become meaningless. You lie back in the moss, watching the stars blink politely above you. No sound now, just rustling leaves and the distant memory of a compliment that changed everything. And somewhere, Hera listens, not for praise, but for the absence of it. The next morning and the grove doesn't dawn. It sort of exhales. The light drips in slowly, as if testing the mood. You wake on a patch of moss that's softer than memory and just as fragile. Around you, the nymphs move in slow, cautious circles. No one speaks, because now they know the grove is listening. You sit up and immediately notice how still everything is. The usual chirps and rustles are gone. Even the butterflies flap their wings apologetically. It's like being in a library made of velvet, with nature itself asking you to please keep it down. The compliment duels are over. Aphrodite has vanished. No storm, no exit flourish, just a single rosebud left floating in the fountain, spinning slowly like a polite middle finger. The message is clear. This is no longer a game. And Echo. Echo is missing. Well, not missing. Exactly. She's there. But she's gone quiet. Not just quiet in the way you'd expect someone who feels guilty might be. No, this is precurse Echo silence. The kind of silence that settles in your bones and makes you realize how much space her voice used to fill, even when she said very little. You walk through the grove with one hand trailing along the vines, which now hum gently, less like a warning, more like a lullaby sung to rowdy children finally put to bed. It's not punishment yet. Not exactly. But the vines are remembering. You reach a clearing once used for compliment rehearsals. The mushrooms that marked the ring have retracted. A few glitter stains remain in the soil, faint echoes of joy, now smudged and fading. The nymphs gather here, cautiously. Some of them are trying new strategies. Instead of compliments, they try nodding enthusiastically. Instead of flattery, they attempt supportive hand gestures. One nymph invents admiration. Blinking slowly and lovingly at a friend while holding your breath. It's terrifying. Another tries praise via interpretive leaf arrangement. It fails spectacularly when a nearby tree takes offense and drops a branch. And still, no one hears Echo because she's hiding, not in shame, not even in defiance, but in confusion, because for the first time, she doesn't trust her own voice. She sits by the old spring, its waters no longer glowing, just gently reflective, and watches her own mouth move without sound. You sit beside her. She doesn't look at you, so you try to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words dissolve midair. The vines don't want this conversation. They want quiet. They want obedience. Echo writes instead, on a flat stone. Using a bit of damp moss as a stylus, she traces the sentence. How do you compliment someone without making the world explode? It's a fair question, because now praise has become a risk. Every kind word could cause another magical surge, another vine warning, another punishment. And yet, the nymphs miss it. They miss being kind, not in the competitive, look at me kind of way, but in the gentle, I see you and I like what I see kind of way. Historians debate whether this emotional starvation, this sudden lack of affirmation, caused any long-term psychological effects on the grove's residents. Some fringe theorists even suggest that the early Greek melancholia epidemics, yes, that was a thing, may have roots in divine flattery bands. It's probably nonsense, but maybe not. Because in the days that follow Hera's scroll, the grove loses more than just noise. It loses joy. Dance circles become walks. Laughter becomes polite silence. Hugs are replaced with nods, then with nothing at all. And slowly, the nymphs begin to forget what made each other shine. You find yourself staring at a group of them now, each sitting quietly, not out of sadness, but something worse, detachment. They're afraid to see each other too clearly, afraid to feel too strongly, because every ounce of visible joy could invite attention from above. Echo finally speaks again. One sentence. Barely a breath. I think I ruined everything. You want to comfort her, but the vines hum again faintly. warningly. So you just sit beside her in silence. The respectful kind. The kind that says, I'm here, without risking magical consequences. And somewhere, deep underground, the vines settle, not in forgiveness, not in wrath, just in waiting. Because Hera still hasn't responded directly. She's left the scroll, left the vines, but her silence is louder than any decree. That's the problem with gods. They don't always punish with lightning. Sometimes they punish by withholding love. And no one knows that better than Echo. You walk carefully now. Every twig feels like it might file a report if you step too loudly. The grove has become a cathedral of caution, soft moss floors, rustling leaves like prayers, and everyone whispering just in case. The nymphs are quieter, not because they've learned to be, but because they're waiting. Waiting to see if Hera's going to drop the hammer, waiting to see if the vines will twist tighter. But most of all, they're waiting for Echo because something has shifted. After days of silence, she speaks again, not with her old rhythm, not with that soft poetry that could stir sap in trees. No, this time, her voice is flat. You have hair. She tells one nymph, your posture resembles an object. She says to another, it's terrifying. Like watching a harp try to play spreadsheets. You'd laugh if it weren't so sad. But Echo is trying. She's trying to say things without triggering anything. She's trying to express kindness without waking up the vines. And in doing so, she starts to lose herself. Because Echo was never just a voice. She was the mirror, the refraction, the warm reminder that you weren't just visible, you were witnessed. And now, she's a safety manual in a meadow. The other nymphs watch her struggle. They want to help, but they're scared too. One even whispers, maybe we just aren't meant to be expressive anymore. Maybe this is the new normal. You flinch. That phrase, the new normal, hits harder than any divine punishment. So Echo does the unthinkable. She rewrites her compliments, not into praise, but into information. I noticed your eyes blinked more times today than yesterday, she says gently to a nervous nymph. You moved efficiently through the forest, she offers to another, like she's running quality control on their souls. It's unbearable. But strangely, the vines don't react. And that's when Echo gets an idea. She calls a meeting, not at the central grove too obvious, too likely to trigger divine surveillance. No, she gathers them at the edge of the dry creek bed, a place the vines don't watch as closely. It's safe because it's boring, and that's exactly what they need. They sit in a circle of stones and wild thyme, and Echo whispers, what if we just told the truth? The nymphs blink. I mean it. Not decoration, not exaggeration, just truth. Like, your face exists truth, someone asks. No. Like, your presence makes things feel less lonely. Echo replies, not poetic, just honest. There's a pause, then a sigh, then a small smile. And someone says, quietly, I missed you. It's not lyrical, it's not exaggerated. It's just true, and it works. No vines react. No scroll descends. The trees don't hum or vibrate. Instead, a light breeze passes through, like someone exhaling relief. Echo builds from there. She trains them in truths. Tell someone one thing they do that matters, but say it without decoration. You make the tea better. You laugh at the right parts of stories. You remember when others don't. They begin to glow again, not literally, not magically, but emotionally. The joy returns. This time without sparkles or similes, no metaphors bloom, but something deeper grows. And it's quiet. It's small, but it's real. Echo, for the first time in days, smiles and says gently, we were never punished for kindness. We were punished for performance. Historians still argue whether this shift in grove culture inspired later Stoic philosophies. This return to stripped-back sincerity, there's no direct link. Of course, but some claim the origin of truth over flourish can be traced back to Echo's circle. You walk away from the creek bed, past a vine that once hissed at flattery. Now it's dormant, not dead, just uninterested. Even Hera, up on Olympus, seems to pause. She hears the change. There are no odes, no sonnets, just small affirmations like seeds placed gently in earth. And in that silence, Echo speaks one final sentence into the night. I hear you, not I adore you, not you're the breath of a comet's dream. Just, I hear you. And the grove lets it stay. You wake to the sound of something gentle, not music, not birdsong, just the soft, rhythmic swish of leaves brushing against each other like old friends exhaling together. It feels different, not staged, not enchanted, just present. The grove somehow feels human. The nymphs gather again not to duel, not to compare adjectives, but to share. They sit in clusters, whispering truths like puzzle pieces. Not everyone participates. That's okay. Some just listen, some just nod. But the pressure to sparkle is gone. Even the air smells less desperate. No more over-perfumed blossoms trying to impress passing bees. Just cedar, soil, and a whisper of rain in the distance. You wander to where Echo used to sit by the fountain, the place where her words once shimmered like coins tossed into a wishing pool. The fountain still ripples, but now it's just water. Honest water. No magic, no metaphor, just cold, reflective stillness. She's there. Of course she is. She doesn't greet you with poetry or praise. She just says, morning. And that's enough. You sit beside her. No vines move. No divine pressure hovers. For the first time in what feels like years, the grove isn't reacting to you. It's coexisting with you. Then Echo turns, eyes tired but steady, and says, I want to say something, but I want to make sure I mean it. You wait. She looks at her hands, at the moss, then at you. You make things better, she says, and nothing happens. No flowers burst. No vines recoil. The compliment's simple, grounded. True just lands and stays. That's the real shift. It's not about not praising each other. It's about praising each other responsibly. You hear someone laugh nearby, really laugh. Not a lyrical giggle, but a full-bodied, borderline unflattering snort. A second later, someone else joins in. It spreads, but not like wildfire, more like sunshine warming a stone wall. Quiet, consistent, non-threatening. Even the vines seem amused. One gently curls around a nearby tree trunk, not as a warning, but like a seatbelt for a very old tree getting comfortable. The grove isn't angry anymore. It's curious. Back near the center, a few bolder nymphs test the waters. One says, your voice has a good rhythm. Another tries, you were kind to me yesterday, and it helped. The compliments have changed. They're less about image and more about action. Less about elegance, more about effect. It's a shift in value, and surprisingly, it sticks. Here's your historical footnote. Some scroll fragments suggest that the kindness shift in Zealinthia marked a philosophical turn in woodland society, the rise of utility-based praise over aesthetic flattery, the birth of compliment pragmatism, if you will. Sure, it didn't spread far. Nymphs outside the grove still competed to be called the fragrance of heroic longing. But in this grove, they remembered what it meant to connect without decorating it first. Later that evening, something strange happens. A single scroll descends from the sky. No peacock feather, no golden glow, just a plain piece of papyrus with faint olive stains and one line of script. I approve of the quiet, but kindness may remain. Hera, there's no reaction, no celebration, just a long exhale. And someone, maybe Echo, maybe not, says, fair. It's the most emotionally stable sentence the grove has heard in weeks. That night, you lie under a cypress tree. It doesn't judge your posture. The stars blink without metaphors. A frog croaks something rude in the distance and doesn't apologize. You smile. Because the grove isn't fixed, it's healing. The next day arrives without ceremony. No enchanted sunrise. No celestial omens. Just a slow spill of light across dew-glazed leaves. You stretch your legs under a canopy that doesn't hum with tension anymore. And for the first time in a while, it feels like you're not walking on metaphorical eggshells or literal ones. Depending on how enchanted the local poultry have been lately, you pass a trio of nymphs braiding each other's hair. No one's narrating it. No one's comparing it to golden vines or the weeping dawn, or thankfully, the tale of a repentant comet. Just three friends, sitting together, enjoying something ordinary. Echo walks by quietly, her presence noted but not swarmed. She's still a little wary. Her voice hasn't fully returned to its old shape, but it's gentler now, measured, purposeful. She passes one of the younger nymphs and simply says, you showed patience today. The nymph smiles like she's just been handed a warm blanket. You pause by a grove path now cleared of enchanted flower traps. This was once the site of the great compliment spiral. a now famous event when 5 nymphs attempted a simultaneous poetic praise loop and accidentally summoned a swirling compliment vortex that pulled in a goat, 2 laurels, and a very surprised tortoise. The tortoise eventually became a cult figure, but that's a later story. Today, that same path is quiet, not empty, just calm. A few nymphs pass one another, offering simple words. You helped me think clearer yesterday. I noticed you cleaned the fountain even though no one asked. You remembered someone's name who thought you wouldn't. They're still compliments, but they're rooted, practical, human. Historians still debate whether this marked a transition in divine culture if the gods, inspired by Hera's restraint and Echo's recalibration, began rethinking their own approach to praise. Zeus, for instance, allegedly tried complimenting a mortal without turning into an animal afterward. It didn't go well, but the effort was noted. Aphrodite, of course, took longer to respond. She reappears midday. You feel her presence before you see her warm air, a faint shimmer of rose oil, and the very specific sound of a perfectly timed sigh. She appears by the mother bark, arms folded, one eyebrow lifted like she just caught the world being a little too reasonable for her liking. So, she says to no one in particular, "We've decided on modesty." Echo steps forward. She doesn't bow, doesn't flinch. Not modesty, she says, just meaning. Aphrodite narrows her eyes. You mean I can't say her ankles remind me of lullabies woven in silk and raised by angels? A vine twitches slightly. You can, Echo says carefully, but only if you actually believe it. Aphrodite studies her. Then, to everyone's surprise, she laughs, not the sarcastic tinkle of divine amusement, but something deeper. Well, she says, if you're going to ruin drama, at least do it with style. And she vanishes again, leaving behind a single rose. Not enchanted, just real. Someone presses it into a bowl of spring water and calls it Echo's rose. It's a bit much, but no one stops them. You meander toward the edge of the grove where the whispering vines have receded, not vanished, just loosened. They still listen, but now they seem less like guards and more like elders watching to see if you've grown up. A small nymph skips by and stops to look at you. Her eyes are curious. "I like your silence," she says. It's awkward, honest. You grin. "Thanks." You reply, "I like your courage." No magic, no tremor, just 2 souls meeting in the middle, and nearby, Echo hums. Not a melody, not a performance, just presence. It rains that evening. Not dramatically, just a fine mist that drifts through the canopy like it's afraid of being rude. The grove drinks it in without fuss, and so do you. It's the kind of rain that doesn't soak, only softens. And here, in this new hush of truth and simplicity, it feels earned. Echo stands at the edge of a shallow stream, watching the water form ripples in response to falling leaves. She's humming again, low and unstructured, not for performance, just for herself. You watch her lean down and skim the surface with her fingers, drawing circles that never quite connect. She doesn't say anything, and neither do you. Oh. And that's when the nymphs gather without ceremony, without invitation. They come in 1s and 2s, barefoot and dewy, still carrying the remnants of their old sparkle in their posture. But they don't bring metaphors this time. They bring presence. One of them steps forward. "We've been thinking," she says slowly, "about something new." Echo turns. No tension. Just curiosity. "We want to keep complimenting each other." The nymph continues, but not like before. Not to win, not to sparkle, just to restore things. Echo tilts her head. "Restore what?" Another nymph answers, stepping beside the first, "connection." And that's how it begins the restoration. Not a festival, not a duel, a practice. Every day, one nymph gives a compliment, but only if it meets 3 criteria. It must be true, it must be kind, and it must not be rehearsed. They call it one true thing. And it works. You hear them as they pass one another. "Your stories help me sleep better. You looked tired yesterday, but you still asked if I was okay. I think about the way you arrange the leaves in that circle, and it makes me feel steadier." There's no applause, no flower burst, just the quiet sound of sincerity rippling out like those circles Echo made in the stream. The whispering vines don't tighten. They relax. Slightly, you catch one of them stretching lazily along a branch like a cat. Somewhere above, Hera is definitely watching, but she doesn't intervene. Maybe she's proud. Maybe she's just exhausted. Either way, the silence she once demanded now feels collaborative. And then, one morning, Echo vanishes. Not with drama, not as punishment. She simply walks past the border of the grove and doesn't come back. They find no trace, no footprints, no dropped flower, just a stone by the stream with 3 words etched into it. You are enough. That's it. No signature, no metaphor, just the truth. The nymphs take turns sitting beside it, not to worship, but to remember, not who Echo was, but how she was. And from then on, the rules change. Compliments become smaller, tighter, rooted in the everyday. And though the magic never returns in quite the same way, no one minds. It's better this way. More sustainable, less explosive. You walk through the grove now, past a nymph carefully rearranging moss so it won't get soggy. She doesn't notice you until you're almost beside her. Then she looks up and says, "I'm glad you're still here." No sparkle, no symphony, just real. And you smile, because this whole thing was never about stopping compliments. It was about unlearning performance. It was about relearning presence. And somewhere beyond the grove, Echo's voice still exists. Not in magic, not in Echo, but in everyone who now knows how to speak kindly without needing to be loud. You wake before sunrise. The grove is hushed, but not afraid. There's a calm here now. A practiced quiet, not an imposed one. The difference is subtle, but you feel it in your bones. No vines are watching. No scrolls threaten from above. You're simply alone with your breath and the slow, steady pulse of a forest that has stopped trying to impress anyone. Still, change is never without ripples. You find a small group of nymphs huddled by the stream where Echo used to sing to the minnows. They're arguing, but gently. She said we can compliment each other. One whispers, "Yeah, but she's not here anymore." Another replies. You crouch beside them, listening, not intruding, just present. The debate is honest, raw, because while the grove is healing, there's still fear. Fear that kindness might tip back into chaos. That praise, however sincere, might awaken the vines again. That someone, somewhere, is still measuring adjectives against thunderclouds. One nymph tries to joke. Maybe we just rate each other's compliments on a scale of 0 to vine strangle. No one laughs. Until someone else adds, only if 10 means spontaneous goat disappearance. And then softly they giggle. The giggle spreads. 1 snort. 2. A whole cluster of laughter like leaves rustling with permission. It's different from before. They're not performing joy. They're relaxing into it. Still, one nymph, Marilla, isn't laughing. She's quiet, withdrawn. You watch her run a fingertip through the water's surface over and over, like she's tracing something she's afraid to say aloud. Finally, she whispers, "I don't know how to speak anymore without trying to be poetic. I forget what real sounds like." No one answers at first, and then someone says, "Real sounds like that." A pause. Then another voice. "Real sounds like you showing up anyway." Marilla doesn't cry, but she exhales. That counts. Here's your quirky myth fact for the night. In an obscure Hellenistic fragment, it's said that the earliest speech therapists weren't orators or healers, but nymphs, who helped mortals find the voice behind the metaphor. They believed that everyone had a shadow truth tucked under their poetic instincts, and that part of growing was learning to speak from that shadow without fear. Echo, they say, was their patron. You wander through the eastern glade, where Aphrodite's rosebud still floats in the fountain. A young nymph leans over it, inspecting the petals. Clearly tempted, she glances around, then quietly whispers to it, "I'm still learning how to like myself." The rose doesn't glow, but it doesn't wilt either, and the water ripples approvingly. Aphrodite hasn't returned, but her energy lingers like expensive perfume on borrowed silk. Not invasive, just faint, luxurious, and gently judging. You think about her last words. If you're going to ruin drama, at least do it with style. And in a way, they are. The grove has become stylish in its restraint. Compliments now take the form of care. A mended sandal, a shared fig, a flower gently tucked behind an ear. Not because it's beautiful, but because it keeps the hair out of your face. One nymph quietly makes us a truth bench under a fig tree. Anyone can sit there and ask to be told something kind, but no poetry allowed. just clarity. I like that you try. You helped me remember I matter. You're not alone in that feeling. Some nymphs still slip into old habits. A few can't resist describing someone's laughter as the echo of a pine tree trying to remember joy. But when they do, they blush, laugh, try again. Because trying here is a form of love. And the vines, they haven't moved in days. Not because they've stopped listening, but because they trust you now. And trust is the rarest compliment of all. Evening folds in slowly, like a gentle shawl being draped across the grove. You sit beneath a fig tree, watching shadows stretch like soft questions across the moss. The air is cooler now, but it doesn't bite, it holds. The grove isn't performing for the sunset anymore. It's simply allowing it to happen. Somewhere to your right, two nymphs are mending a tunic. One sews while the other holds the fabric taut. They don't say much, just little murmurs. Careful there, you've got a steady hand. Said not for effect, but for connection. Echo hasn't returned, but her influence is everywhere. The stone at the stream still reads, "You are enough," and no one's dared to add to it. Not out of fear, out of respect. Her absence hasn't made her disappear. It's made her settle. Like sediment in clear water, the grove feels clearer now because of her. But today, something odd happens. A vine speaks, not dramatically, not loudly, just a gentle unfurling. The sound of leaves brushing together like a whisper. Too quiet to catch the first time. It coils upward not to block, not to judge, but to present something. A scroll. You tense. The nymphs nearby freeze mid-movement. One drops her needle, but this scroll is different. It's smaller. No glow, no divine fragrance. Just parchment, tied with a bit of faded lavender thread. You untie it slowly, half expecting thunder, but instead, it reads, "We listen still, not to silence you, but to know when we are no longer needed." That's it. No decree, no command, just a note, a blessing. Maybe. You pass the scroll around, one by one. The nymphs read it. Some smile, some weep. One of them kisses it gently before handing it to the next. It's not permission, it's recognition. You have become trustworthy. Later that night, you find yourself near the truth bench again. Someone has added a small bowl of figs and a tiny sign. One per truth. The figs are sweet. The truths, even sweeter. I miss someone. And I pretend I don't. I'm afraid I'll never be as kind as I want to be. I envy people who don't need to be noticed. The vines curl gently around the base of the fig tree, cradling the bench like it's something precious. They're not guardians anymore. They're companions. You lie down in the moss, hands behind your head, and exhale into the night air. There's no more buzzing tension, no waiting for judgment, just the soft rhythm of a place that has remembered how to breathe. And somewhere, maybe not far, maybe impossibly far, Echo walks alone. Her steps quiet, her voice tucked behind her lips, like a match she no longer needs to strike. Because the grove is glowing again, not with magic, but with truth. And in the distance, a nymph leans close to her friend and says softly, "You changed the air in the room when you arrived." Then she pauses and adds, "That was a compliment, and I mean it." The grove doesn't flinch. It smiles. It's the softest morning the grove has known. No mist, no drama, just that kind of perfect light that turns dew into glass and silence into something generous. You rise slowly, not because you're tired, but because there's no longer anything chasing you. No compliments to outrun, no vines to tiptoe around, just peace. Lapping gently at the edges of the day, the nymphs have built something new, not a temple, not a shrine, just a circle, flat stones, arranged loosely around the old stream. One for sitting, one for thinking, one simply labeled here. No instructions, just space. That's what they've learned. You realize not just how to speak, but how to leave room for others to. Today, they meet in that circle with no theme, no compliment practice, no poetic tournaments. They talk, not to be beautiful, not to be clever, just to be real. You listen, someone shares. "I used to think being noticed was the same as being loved." Another nods. "I used to think silence meant failure." A pause. "I still do. Sometimes." They all nod, not to fix it, just to hold it. And that's the magic now, not in transformation, but in witnessing. Even the vines long retired from their watchdog role curl lazily around the circle like they're listening to. No longer tense, just draped, loose, free. A young nymph stands near the edge, Her hair is wild, her tunic wrinkled. She doesn't speak much. But today, she takes a breath and says, "I'm not ready to say beautiful things yet." Silence. Then Echo's words return not in voice, not in echo, but in memory. "You are enough." The nymph smiles and sits. You walk slowly through the grove one last time. Everything looks the same, and nothing does. The trees are taller somehow, not literally, but with the posture of something proud. Not proud because it's better, but because it made it through. The moss is softer, the air is slower, and the space between people now feels kind. Not because it's filled with flattery, but because it doesn't need to be. You reach the fountain, where Aphrodite's rosebud still spins in the water. It hasn't wilted, hasn't bloomed further either. It just is perfect in its unfinishedness. A symbol not of divine beauty, but of restraint, of balance, of love that doesn't demand a stage. Someone passes you on the path and offers a quiet nod, no words. And it's perfect, because you know what they meant. And more importantly, so do they. The grove isn't perfect. It still stumbles, still slips into old habits. Someone recently tried to say, "Your presence makes my soul simmer like thyme steeped in longing," and was promptly handed a polite fruit and asked to sit down. But it recovers now. It self-corrects, because kindness, once learned without pretense, doesn't unlearn easily. That's Echo's gift, not her voice, not her poetry, but her reminder that you don't need to shine to be seen, that you don't have to wrap your truth in glitter for it to be worthy of a place here. And somewhere, maybe far, maybe just out of sight, she's still walking, not because she was banished, but because some lessons echo better from a distance. The grove lives on, quieter, braver, truer, and now, so you settle back. Let your shoulders soften. Let the breath leave your body slower than it came in. You're safe here, in this softened grove where nothing demands performance, where compliments don't echo endlessly, and where beauty isn't something you earn, it's just something that is. Let the breeze tuck itself around you. Let the quiet of a place that finally trusts its own stillness wrap gently around your mind. The nymphs are quiet now, not in fear, but in choice. They've chosen presence over praise, truth over show, and kindness that doesn't sparkle, but stays. Even the vines sleep. Even Hera listens. And perhaps smiles. You've walked through chaos and lyric and echo and grace, and now there is only stillness, only the warmth of knowing. You are enough, exactly like this, exactly now. Shh.